6:35.
Today is Wednesday, January 3rd, and it's 6:35. Indivisible. For the agenda, this is a discussion of the capital improvement program, 2018.
Okay, in getting started, before we get into the capital budget, I did want to make a couple of announcements. One is that due to the forecasted storm conditions for tomorrow, all non-essential municipal offices will be closed. In addition, the schools will be closed for tomorrow as well. We'll be monitoring the situation throughout the storm tomorrow to determine where we stand as far as power losses throughout the community and what services we will need to provide to assist the public. Parking ban will go into effect as of midnight this evening till further notice. The senior center, located at 25 St. Dominic Road, is the town's designated warming center and may serve as the shelter if need be. That will be opening on Thursday morning at or about 7:30 a.m. All calls for services need to go through 911 for emergency purposes. To report a power outage, power lines down, or trees down in power lines, the calls need to go to National Grid. Their number is 1-800-465-1212. For snow-related issues on roads, routine snow plowing issues, down tree notices, need to go to the town's highway division. That number is 284-3299. For emergencies, they can also be forwarded to Dispatch Center Public Safety Building at 783-3321. Our main concerns are, in addition to the snow, the concern with the temperatures that will plummet in the early mornings of Friday and Saturday. So we need to have good assessments as to any power outages. We have met with representatives from National Grid, as well as had 2 planning meetings today with staff. We have great cooperation going on with each of the municipal offices as well as the fire districts. Fire districts will assist us on transports if necessary for persons without transportation that have lost power and need a warming center. So it will be a group effort, and hopefully we will keep everybody safe. Now, on to the subject for tonight's budget. Tonight, we're starting with the first 3 sections of the capital improvement program for the 2018 to 2019 through 22-23 fiscal year. I'm going to go through some of this quite quickly because a lot of it is also repetitious of what we did in the initial budget hearing. If there's questions, please stop me at any time and we'll go from there. We're going to start with the budget message, where you start at section 1, page 2, where we talk about what is it, what are capital projects, what is the capital improvement program, things of that nature. When we look at capital projects, we look at them as being major, non-reoccurring, tangible, fixed assets for the town. They must have a value in excess of $10,000 and a useful life greater than the length of the debt used for the project for it, or a minimum of 5 years. Types of capital improvements include property acquisitions, improvements, facility improvements, those types of things. The capital improvement program is governed under the Town Code, Chapter 6 for Capital Improvement Ordinance. Specific information is provided within that as to presentation of the document. The budget is a planning document. I say this each year, and it's very important. Many of the projects that we show here are based on schedules that are anticipated schedules. Those schedules are prioritized once a year, each year when we update the capital improvement program. Some communities have gone to 2- and 3-year cycles on their capital improvement programs. I think the way ours is set up, to have it reevaluated on a yearly basis and being able to look at priorities makes the most sense for a budget to be responsive to what community changing needs may be. When we move on to page 1-3, we talk about the different types of projects by category, whether they're in facilities, recreation, public services, really the whole gamut. It's not just related to the general fund. It's related to every one of our enterprise funds as well as our capital revenue funds, and are managed many times through our capital funds, where we deposit monies in advance of a project being anticipated as a way of smoothing what the cost would be for major improvements. The time schedule we've talked about in the past meetings. On page 1-3, you'll see where we are tonight. We are on the Wednesday the 3rd meeting. I do want to note, as on the chart, that we will be canceling tomorrow evening's work session. That session will be added to the agenda for Monday night's regular council session, and will begin immediately subsequent to the conduct of the regular session of the council. I would anticipate, based on the length of that agenda, that we will be commencing capital budget for the second night at about 8:15 to 8:30. But we are changing in view of the storm conditions that are anticipated for tomorrow. We'll catch up on the meeting on the 8th, and we'll be ready then to have the final meeting on capital improvements, which is scheduled for Wednesday, January 10th. I do want to also note that based on the capital improvement program ordinance, the council is requested to adopt a capital improvement program on or before February 1st of each year. It's important to note that the adoption of the capital improvement program may see amendments thereafter as the council develops the operating budget, so there could be revisions made on what the council establishes on or before February 1st. There may also be recommendations from staff on adjustments to the capital budget, which would be incorporated into the 2018-2019 operating budget, both for the town side of the budget and for the school side of the budget. Moving on, I have shown statistical profiles of population in the past. The U.S. Census 2016 American Community Survey was just released last week. So this information has been updated from what was in the initial filing of the capital improvement program. And I think that it's important to take a look at, in 2000, 18.6% of the population was under age 14. That dropped to 13.9% in 2010, and in the next 6 years has dropped to 12.7%. When we look at the senior population, we looked at there is the age grouping of over 60. 14.8% of the population was over 60 in 2000. That went up by 5%, up to 19.6% in 2000, and is now up to a whopping 24.7%. What you're seeing here is that we're aging in place as a community. Ages from 45 to 59 have stayed relatively constant because there is a general loss in the population in the ages of 35 to 44. This statistical profile is important for council review in view of major decisions that will be coming forward relative to school population, school facilities, and school programs. As council's aware, on January 16th, the town, as well as the school department, will be for the first time seeing the facilities improvement scenarios that have been developed by the school department's consultant. These statistics, I think, are somewhat different than what's being projected with the school department's consultant. One of the areas of dispute that I have is the suggestion that when people hit age 70, they will be selling their homes. We're not seeing that based on what the statistical reviews show with that 16-year term. What we're seeing is that people are staying much longer. What's not taken into consideration with a community like South Kingstown, many homeowners that are of age 60 or above may in fact have second homes, which would allow them to maintain ownership here in South Kingstown as well as in a different location. And there's not a focus as far as the loss of the home or the need to sell. One of the other concerns that we have is that when you see a young population disappearing, it also suggests that young people are having difficulty moving into the community based on the cost of housing and what the cost of property tax is to support that housing. So when you look at budget development, there needs to be focus in terms of how each of the different aspects of budgeting impact both current populations and future populations. If you move on to page 7 on the first section, it just shows the charting of population since 1960. Again, we had major population increases between 70 and 80 and 80 and 90. What we're seeing now is really a stabilization of the population and more of a stabilization, but really a standing in place of population. When we look at the value of homes, what we're seeing is that the value of homes that we're at about $350,000 as far as the median sale price, not assessed value, but sale price of homes, which means that we've recovered from the recession, where in 2007 our value was up to a high of $359,000. But what we can also see is that the state, while they are recovering, the distance between what the state average is and what the South Kingstown average is growing. So there's a greater disparity between what values are here versus on a start level. This goes back to my concerns as far as the value of real estate. I will say to you that when we look on the next page on the statistical profile, you can see the values from the 359 down to the 350 where we are today, and see where the tax levy changes have been. We've averaged over that 10-year period about a 1.1% increase in the property tax levy, which I think is very good for a community that's lost as much state aid as it has. But you're seeing that the number of new houses being constructed are being limited to about 30 to 35, where if you go back to the 80s, we had in excess of 200 houses at a given year. When we put the budget projections together for the initial budget hearing, I told you we were carrying $30 million in new taxable property. As of today, Gene's reported about $33 million. That doesn't mean that's where we'll end up. We've still got some additional that it's there, but we could lose money when it comes to the tangibles that are not going to be available for us to look at until after March. But what I'm seeing is that we are seeing some good development within the property tax base, but where we're seeing that development is targeted toward a plus 55 population. When we move on to the property tax levy for the past 5 years, you can see we're averaging about a 1.44%. We're still looking at about a 75-25 split between where taxes go. So about 75 cents of every dollar goes for school purpose, with the remainder 25% staying at the town. I will say that the town share has grown by about 0.75% over the last couple of years, but What we're also seeing is that there will be greater pressure in the 18-19 year from the school purposes based on, for school purpose, based on what we're anticipating for loss in state aid, as well as revenue erosion, both the Medicare income and on outside tuitions. So I'm concerned when we look at 18-19. I've completed a full review of the budget. We have got really an initial budget prepared so that when Rob comes in, he'll be reviewing a budget document that's complete at this point, where certainly he can make revisions, but things are in place at this point for review rather than assembly. But what we're looking at is that we're probably looking closer in the 2.5% range than what we normally would be targeting at 2% to be able to balance. That would assume normal increases on the municipal side and probably in the area of about 2.5% on the school side as an end point. But again, we're still working on those numbers, but we're seeing growing pressure as far as what that school program is going to cost as we go forward. And again, I've got to remind you that we won't see the final budget from the schools until February 14th. The statistical profile on tax growth, I think, is important to point out only in terms of looking at what the distribution of where does your tax dollars come from. And you can see that you got almost 85% is coming out of your residential base and about 11% coming from your commercials. What we're going to see is additional change in the tax generated sources based on what changes occur with motor vehicles. If motor vehicles continue to be phased out, we're going to continue to see a much greater value coming in the residential area. But what we'll see is an increase, an offsetting increase as far as revenue from the state to offset that loss of the property tax from the motor vehicle itself. But I think that this is important because anytime you raise taxes, the major impact is going to be on the homeowner. Unemployment, while I don't think that this is an important factor because it jumps on a yearly basis, we're looking at 2.9% in 2017 in October. However, the numbers for November came in they came in yesterday, and it's up to 3.7%. So you're going to see that type of a month-to-month jump. So it's not a predictable unless you're looking at the full year. The next page, I think, is important because what it's looking at is how many people are looking for work versus how many people are employed. And for October 2017, we had 470 people looking for work. The November numbers jumped that up to 620. So you can see there's a lot of float that's there, because it's not that there's 620 people looking for work. It may be people that are underemployed being considered in that number. So the underemployed would really push up that number. So I think your unemployment rate is going to stay right around what state averages is in the 3.2 to 3.5 range. Staying with statistical profiles, I've given you this chart in the past, and I just give it to you so that you understand that every community is different in terms of its assessment base and where they get their taxes from. As you can see, when you look at it, Narragansett, got a 90 percentile that's for its residential and only 6.7. But you look over to North Kingstown, they're showing 16% as far as commercials. And that doesn't take into consideration the tax-exempt property that's under a pilot agreement at Quonset. So each community is going to have a far different, and you need to drill down if you really want to try to make any type of valid comparisons. There is no valid comparison as far as rates. There is only valid comparisons as far as tax effort. Moving on to the second page of that statistical analysis, you can see South Kingstown's tax levy was $70.4 million in fiscal 17. When we look at North Kingstown, they raised more money. They were up at $75 million that was required. But when you look back on the other page and you look at Narragansett has a larger tax base than South Kingstown. And North Kingstown's tax base is smaller than South Kingstown. Again, the relationship changes that you're not comparing apples to apples because of the piloting programs. And then when you really look at Westerly, which is a much smaller community in terms of population, it's got a tax base that's over $1 billion higher than in South Kingstown. So each of these communities has different ways of generating money as well as different demands for the money. When you look at levy per capita, that gives you somewhat of a better idea as to how much tax effort is being required. And you can see where South Kingstown's in at about $2,300. You've got some communities up over $3,000. Their rates may be lower, but their value per capita would be higher. We're also the only community with a AA1 value, where the others are all AA2s, which is also the same rating that the state of Rhode Island holds. I think one of the telltales that you should be concerned with and take pride in it is when you look at your debt per capita as well as your gross debt, direct debt, where we're showing $14 million in outstanding debt as of the 2016-17 year. You can see Narragansett's got $26 million and North Kingstown up at $54 million. Well, just remember that for every $1 million that you borrow in the first couple of years, if it's at a 3% rate, you're paying about $80,000 in tax dollars to put service on that. So when you start looking at the differences there, you can see what some of the communities have got greater focus as far as where their property tax dollars are going to debt, which means that it's not available for operational purposes. So it's important to look at when new debt is going to be incurred, what the impact is going to be, because every dollar that goes into debt service is one less dollar that would be available for you to put into operations, or that you'd have to increase the rate to be able to produce additional dollars. When you look at the bottom line there with the average single-family unit, this is another one of the areas where people say Narragansett's tax rate is much cheaper than South Kingstown's, and it is. They're in at a tax rate of $10.08, and we're at the $15.09 for the year here. But when you take a look at what the value is for the house difference of what's being paid, they're still going to be paying less dollars per house, but it's because of the larger value. So you've got to consider all of those different things if you want to make valid comparisons, and you have to look at each of the communities' spending demands. Moving on, the next page this is on 1-11. I should be giving you the page numbers, but on 1-11 takes a look at what the 2017-18 budget is in terms of the $77 million. That's really, when we talk about that as a general fund, that's really the property taxes that are necessary to support all third-party sources, whether it's the school department, whether it's the senior program, whether it's the recreation center. And so what we're looking at is overall, when you add the third-party revenues for the school department in, about $85 million. Total budgets, when we deal with all of the enterprise funds, all of the capital funds, special revenue funds, is about a $100 million budget at this point for the community. We're showing about an increase from the 83 to 85 million in the single year in that 5-year period. Page 1-11 shows the community as far as where do people work in South Kingstown in terms of both number of jobs and what value of taxable income the state would be seeing. And you can see that between government and healthcare, which would be URI, Town of South Kingstown School Department, South Kingstown, and the hospitals, over 53% of the income generated in the community is coming from those sources. So When you look at government and you look at hospital and you look at university, they are the principal employers that are going to have profound impact on how a community can grow and what type of tax demands they can meet. We move on to section 2, page 2. I've given you a breakout as far as the capital improvement program for the year. What we're looking at is a budget of about $19.8 million is what's being shown. And again, as a planning document, we may not spend that amount. We may spend more over that 6-year period. It's going to be dependent on what council approvals of projects are and those that are ready to go forward. Funding sources we'll talk about as we move forward. I want to jump to the next page on the annual funding element. When we look at the annual funding element, that is the capital budget. The first year of a capital improvement program is the capital budget. That's the pay-as-you-go portion of your program. So this is the dollar amount that's going to be necessary in the 18-19 year budget preparation for the general fund. So you can see we would be up to $1.532 million if everything went according to the initial plan, or about $33,000 over the current year. When we look at the wastewater enterprise fund, that's a major change in the first year, and I want to make sure it's clear, and I'll mention it probably a couple of times tonight. When we look at the wastewater enterprise fund, that is supported by the regional sewer system for Narragansett, University of Rhode Island, and the town of South Kingstown. If we spent the $1,023,000, we would pay a proportionate share based on what our flow ratios are for each of the system components. So of that $1,023,000, probably about 60% of that is being paid for by our regional partners. So while we are showing a major increase there, none of it comes from property taxes. It comes from user base income, or it comes from a designated fund balance that's held within the enterprise fund for wastewater. We're showing some declines as far as water enterprise funds, but that's just in the first year. When you look out over the 6 years, as I'll show you, it's relatively stable. Moving on to page 2-5, you'll start to see the leisure service element itself. That's down to 2.6 from the 3.2, but that's not a fair comparison because we had $620,000 in the current year that was used for Noid's Farm and for the bike path to the common. Those projects should be finished in 17-18, so they're not going to be included in the future 6-year program. But again, we'll identify. When we look at you've got 6 projects there that are associated with leisure service programming, and we'll go through those in detail on Monday night. The next slide shows the general municipal programs for the 6 years, and that's, again, where there was $100,000 that's being transferred in 18-19 into affordable housing, so it's not comparable as far as looking at the 8.2 going down to 7.9. You need to look at these programs individually to really decide what the impact of the programs and the need for the programs, and that's why we'll spend some time on Monday providing the departmental justifications for each of the specific projects that are listed here. So you've got the next page deals with the school department and with the utilities. Just quickly on the utilities, we've been carrying $1.1 million for the replacement of the meters at the water. We will do that sometime within the next 6 years, but only upon the time when we determine that the existing meters need to be replaced. Right now, they are getting close to the end of their useful life, but we're not going to replace them until we see substantial failures in the system that warrant us to do a total system replacement. Revenues necessary for that replacement are already in hand within the capital enterprise fund for the water department. That money has been collected in terms of surplus dollars on a yearly basis. Once we did the rate study 4 years ago. We've been raising the rates so that we would be able to accommodate the replacement of that without having to go to a bonding purpose. When we look at the overall capital improvement program and take the annual funding element and the bonding element separate, you can see overall it would be $39 million. Well, part of the pay-as-you-go budget is contained within the bonding element. So you need to subtract that. So the true increase next year would be about a $1.7 million 6-year program increase over what was adopted in the current year. And again, one of the major factors there is that for a 6-year program, we are taking the wastewater needs from $2.8 million that was adopted in current year up to $5.2 million. So again, only about a 40% of that increase would be associated with the payments necessary from the rate base in the wastewater program itself. Also on page 2-6, this year in the budget message, I wanted to give at least recognition of 2 major projects that are currently underway. One has been approved by the council and is in implementation. That's the radio alarm box system. I don't need to talk about that, but I wanted to reference it in the memo because it is important that those are going to be expensive programs, and there's still unfinished work with it. The unfinished work with the radio alarm system is that Trish will need to develop for council consideration a system of how we would provide advanced funding for the commercial users. That won't be necessary until the entire network is installed on the municipal and the school buildings, but we will be seeing that, and what we'll have to do is to bring that to the council in the form of an ordinance for us to be able to establish a proper mechanism. What that system is, I think I've mentioned before, is a 5-year tie-in requirement where we would give the units and let the people pay for it over 5 years. If they chose not to get into the system until the 3rd year, they'd be down to 3 years that they would be seeing value and benefit. So once Trish has that to Rob, they can make some recommendations to the council. But that probably won't be occurring until the latter part of the fiscal year, probably in April, May, once we have the network in place at all of the municipal and school buildings. That would then allow accommodation of the commercial users of the system. The LED street lighting program, we are at a point right now where Narragansett, South Kingstown, North Kingstown are acting as a regional concern. All 3 of us are waiting for the completion of the inventory of street lights that's being done by Mr. Broadhead. Once we have that, we'll be able to do the bidding to get prices on, 1, the acquisition of the existing street light system, 2, the cost of implementing a LED installation. Before we do the LED installation, we're going to need a maintenance contract on the existing plant that we buy. Then we'll do an installation of the LEDs, so we'll need a cost as well as an operating expense associated with the LEDs. And we'll have to consider whether or not the community wants to put controllers on the lights to provide greater flexibility in terms of the use of that lighting system. We're anticipating the overall cost of that to be in the $500,000 to $600,000 range, but until we get it out on the street, as far as multiple companies that are interested in providing the lighting system and also the controller networks, we won't have a specific cost. I anticipate that there will be substantial savings on the cost of providing power, both for the LEDs as well as what we're currently paying for the street system on a month-to-month basis for the amount of electricity that they're being used. The buyback, hopefully, when the final recommendation comes to you, I'm expecting will be in the 3 to 5 year range to pay for that system, and after that, it will be savings to the community.
Steve,
I think both of these are very important projects. I am hopeful that that staff can get them to close to completions prior to the close of this fiscal year. That's why they're not included in the capital improvement program that you're looking at this evening for the 18-19 year.
Steve, I have a question. Are you worried about the maintenance cost of maintaining the lights at all, or do you still think we'll see a savings even with the cost to maintain them?
I think there'll be a savings. I think the cost that Grid is charging us for the maintenance of the existing lights is extremely high. And I think that with a third-party vendor working for the communities, and particularly if we can get a vendor that's working with lighting systems for all three communities, that we may be able to see an economy of scale with that. So, again, we don't have the numbers. We're anticipating this. We've looked at a couple of communities that are further along in the process to look at what their costs have been. And I think that once we get the final number from Grid, and once we take a look, right now, the League of Cities and Towns is involved with the PUC as far as looking at some of the tariffs that are in place now and the contract that municipalities are being forced to sign with Grid. Those contracts, we believe, need to be amended to better protect the municipalities, and that's being submitted through the League at this point to attempt to get those things straightened out. So I think if we wait a little bit longer, we may be in a better position to have a better contract with Grid.
And sharing between the three municipalities, Narragansett, North Kingstown, and South Kingstown, are we going to share that cost equally, or is it going to be percentage-wise based on who has more lights?
It's based on units.
Okay.
Whatever we're buying, because the other thing, too, is what type of lights we want to purchase. What we want to see is what the prices are. If we can get one vendor that's going to be able to supply for all three of us, if Narragansett's buying 1,500 and we're buying 2,000, our price is going to be based on the unit. The same thing with the maintenance costs.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, we've never given consideration to setting up a lighting district. I don't think that would be in anybody's best interest. On 2-7 and 2-8, I provide a disclaimer as far as school department's proposed bonding program and capital improvement program. As you recall last year, when we sat down, I said at that point, we should not be spending dollars, and the council agreed, if we are not sure what buildings are going to be used or in what manner are those buildings going to be used. We then had the school department agree that they would hire a consultant to do the physical analysis of all of the facilities as well as to look at future of education programming. At this point, we have not seen the facility study, so any of the information that the school department submitted for their capital budget inclusion is really almost identical to what was submitted last year. What I say in the budget message is that once the facilities plan is completed, once a scenario for how buildings are going to be used and how education is going to be delivered is determined, we would then be able to map out what a capital improvement program for a 6-year period should look like for the schools. I note that there's only $4 million in bonding authorization that's available for schools at this point, and I will assume that the cost that will be associated with facilities planning will be considerably higher. It doesn't stop there. The problem also is that with the changes associated with the Jacobs report and the state changing the funding methodology for school construction, that the time period for working out a capital improvement program that's sanctioned and approved for funding by the state is going to take us probably into calendar 19. It also means that we have to look at if there's additional bonding authorization that's going to be required. Is that going to be required in general elections in 18, a special election sometime between 18 and 20, or be held back as far as November of 20? These are all questions I can't answer for you until we have some finality within where the school department is going. The $4 million that's in there for bonding authorization will show as being put into the market over the course of the 6 years. $2 million of it will go out in 2020, and $2 million more will go out in 2022. The only reason I put that in there so that it won't look as if we're not going to see debt service requirements associated with the schools. How those dollars are going to be spent, I don't believe have any relativity to what was submitted, because that should be considered only as a placeholder at this point. So I've made that clear in the budget message. I've also made it clear within the budget document itself. The meeting that we hold next Wednesday with the school department is an important meeting, but again, it's in advance of any facilities planning. I have spoken with the superintendent. She has advised that several scenarios have been suggested to her, but nothing on paper has been provided. Rob has, as our new manager, has had contact with the superintendent, and hopefully will be meeting with her in advance of the meeting on the 16th, so that he's up to date as far as that's concerned. But Rob and I have some major concerns after going through the documents as to whether or not we're going to be in a position to have a better idea as to where we're going to be going until the school committee is able to react to the plans that come forward, the funding scenarios that come forward from the consultant that they're using. So,
Steve,
stay tuned.
just looking at the timeline, so if next Wednesday they get some recommendations, the school committee, from the consultant, and say they embrace them and they know what they want to do, if they needed to bond money for a project, they would still need RIDE approval for a capital project.
That's correct. Right now, the schools are operating under a 5-year approved plan.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the third year of that plan. And they have approval to spend about $1,025,000 on Matunic and West Kingston for HVAC electrical improvements. We said to them last year and the year before, we don't want you to spend that money until you can justify that those buildings are going to be used for those purposes.
Right.
We're not even sure, based on the facilities analysis that's being done now, on whether that would be a top priority.
Mm-hmm.
So while they could go forward with that action at this point, it would not be recommended that they do anything until there's a plan in place. But my concern to you is that we're talking about going 2 years where we really haven't seen any improvements that have been made, other than some roof improvements on a couple of the buildings, and not much more than that. And with the number of buildings that we're managing, those buildings need to be maintained on a yearly basis. And we need to have capital programming throughout to be able to keep the envelopes of those buildings as well as the interiors taken care of. The way the schedule is going, we're talking about being 2 years with doing little, and another 2 years of possibly doing even less, until we can get the a new 5-year plan. Now, with that new 5-year plan, for the state to approve a plan, there's going to need to be a building committee. That building committee is going to have municipal representation on it, in terms of whatever steering committee is going to be necessary to come up with a final plan. So municipal side will be involved. I think that, in the past, we've used multiple members on staff, whether it's through engineering, through planning, or the manager's office. I think it's going to be crucial that that type of focus is still provided when the next 5-year planning committee is put together.
And based on the meeting that we had with RIDE a few weeks ago, their timeline seemed like you couldn't even really request anything until the fall, and then you're looking at 2019 before.
Pre-application, according to RIDE, was going to be in October of 2018, with an invitation to those submitters to submit a full application as late as February of 19. And February of 19, it would be reviewed with a final approval of the plan sometime around June of 19. They were also suggesting that there's a necessity for schematics to be created in advance of the full application being submitted in February, which means that there's going to be money expended in advance of funding availability being demanded. The last leg of this table is that the new funding formula that's being proposed has to go through the General Assembly. And one of the things that they're looking at is the potential for a $200 million state bond that would be used on pay-as-you-go money. In other words, if we spent money this year, we would get all of it, so it wouldn't be bonded. But how that distribution is going to occur won't be defined until the legislation is finalized, which most likely isn't going to occur until budget crunch in June. So there's going to be some very important planning that's necessary, but the approval process for that planning is going to have to meet a state schedule that seems to be somewhat advanced. I do not think that they can wait as long as what they're talking about at this point. I think there is going to have to be some expedited improvements made on many school buildings, but until we get a better reading as to what we need to do and what's financially viable to be accomplished, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to move. I think that you're going to need to create a midterm capital improvement program for the schools once we get a better idea as to closure with this consultant. Whether they accept everything that's been said, whether they throw out everything and say we're starting from square one, you're going to need to then at that point be able to say, what is it that we can afford to do, and what's the priorities for doing it? Is the priorities going to be in multiple buildings? Is it going to be a focus on a single building that needs the most work? And are we going to develop those plans in a phased approach? So I think I'm frustrated that I was not able to address it, but I couldn't address it based on the timing of that study.
We know where you live.
Just a couple of more pages. On 2-8, I wanted to talk at the end of the message about, where we've been and where we're going with enrollments. Even the study that was done, the demographic review that was done for the consultant, is still suggesting an average of 36 student loss per year. Whether or not that's accurate or not accurate, we won't know for that 5-year period. But when we look at the past 10 years, we've seen a loss of an average of 67 children per year and about 665 kids over that 10-year period. So enrollment erosion is going to continue. If the consultant's accurate in his projections, it'll stabilize in the next after 5 years. I'm not sure I'm going to agree that I see it the same way at this point. If we continue to see the demographic changes in terms of the population bracketing that's occurring and has been occurring over the last 16 years. All right, then we get into Section 3. Section 3 is going to look at the bonded indebtedness of the community. Here, there's a lot of good news in terms of where we stand in terms of being able to properly bond for the community, as well as to be able to meet future needs and its relationship to the tax base. So let's just jump into it. On the first slide looks at, we were at $22.7 million back in 2011-12 as far as money we owed. We're now at $10,142,000. So in that 5-year period, you've seen a reduction of 55% of your debt. You've paid off $12.6 million. And when you go back to 2002, 2003, when we did the Broad Rock School, our debt stood at $41.8 million. So right now we went from $48.8 million in 2003, and we are down as of the close of the 17 year at $10.1 million. So we have spent a good deal of time not putting additional money into borrowing, and also at the same time paying down that debt. When you look at the next page, we say, okay, what's the existing debt? If the town councils were to say from here forward, for the next 6 years, 7 years, we are not going to bond penny one. For the 17-18 year, because we sold bonds, we sold $5.4 million in bonds in, I think it was August. We now have a debt level that's going to be at $13.7 million in 17-18. If we do nothing, we'll be down to $4.9 million. So in other words, you'll be taking out another 64% of your total debt would be out if you did absolutely no additional borrowing. Again, my capital improvement program suggests that you should be considering at minimum $5.5 million. $4 million for the schools, $500,000 associated with road improvements, and $1 million that would be associated with non-property tax payments on the debt, but through the Neighborhood Guild program, reinvested income. That's something you're going to have to look at carefully because reinvested income is down. Whether or not we can afford to pay debt service on that $1 million after the improvements that we've made for handicapped accessibility are something that we may have to push that back or reduce the $1 million. I'm still carrying the $1 million because I think we need to use the $1 million on that building. But if we can't get it out of reinvested income, it's going to become a tax effort. And to date, no money has ever been spent on the improvements, maintenance, or operation of the Guild that came from tax dollars. And we're trying to keep that program alive in that manner. So let's move on. The next page just simply shows what the charts have already told you. It gives you actual numbers. You can see on this chart that we borrowed $4,055,000 for the rec center in the 18 year, 385 and 980. The reason that it's showing 4 million, instead of showing 4.1 million, it's showing the 4,055,000. That's because when we sold the bonds, there was a premium that was provided. We took the premium and took it against the principal amount, so we borrowed less money than we were authorized to borrow, rather than taking it and using it for debt service payments in the future. So we borrowed less money so that we would save money in the long run over the 20-year term. Both the rec center and the school bond for the $1 million, we had $1 million, but we only had to borrow 980 of it. Those are 20-year notes, 20-year bonds. The transportation at the 385, which was the 400,000 that we used, that was a 10-year bond. Any of the transportation bonds I've recommended you consider doing 10 years rather than 20, because the life of the improvement is going to be no longer than the 10. Any of the future bonds that we look at within the 6-year schedule, I forecast at a 3% rate. The bonds that we sold in August, we sold at 1.4, I think it was, about 1.4. So I'm still being very conservative as far as the estimates of what debt service would cost going forward. The page 3-3 shows you the bonds that are recommended in the 2019-20 year and the 21-22 year. And you can see that's the 5.5 that's in the schedules that you have before you. I do point out that if you're going to have the road and bridge and you're going to sell it in 2020 year, it would have to be council authorizing and submitting it to General Assembly to get it on the ballot for November of this year. So that will be a step that will be necessary. Trish will take care of that through getting the bond council to prepare the necessary legislation for us. You know, a question that always comes up, and in fact, when we looked at it, Robert asked me the question yesterday as far as what our debt limit is. Debt limit in South Kingstown at this point is based on 3% of the tax base, which means that theoretically you could borrow up to $138.5 million. We've only got, most of our bonds are not subject to the 3% level. So we've got about $3.8 million against that 138. So according to the audit that's just been completed, we have the flexibility for borrowing up to $134 million. Not that I would suggest that that should occur, but the 3% rule really has little material impact on what we do because the bonds that we will put forward for referendum purpose would be outside of that 3% limit. Moving on with the future bonds, I've talked about the bonds there. This 3-6 will show you the loading in the 2020 year and in the 2022 year. Again, those school bonds are there as placeholders and nothing more than that. But what I wanted to do was to load debt service in so that if we were selling bonds, you know, if I'd left it out, it would show us paying a lot less in debt service, which I don't think an appropriate or realistic projection. Moving on for projected bonded debt level, we can see here that that if we borrow that $5.5 million, integrate it into the debt schedule, we're going to be going from $13.7 million in the current year. That's where we are now. And by the end, we'd be at $9.5 million. So we're going to be retiring an additional $4.1 million in debt, even though we're adding $5.5 million in new borrowing that'll be termed out for either the 20-year period or the 10-year period. So even with the 5.5 added, you're going to be seeing about a 30% reduction on the face value of municipal debt. And again, this has purposely been done this way because what we wanted to do is to get the debt level down before we would start any appreciable increase in borrowing. We had the $5.5 million in the current year, and over the next 6 years, we would then be looking at another $5.5 million. You have great flexibility if there's projects that you want to accomplish within the debt structure that we have created through the approvals of the past capital improvement programs by the town. All debt that's listed on this sheet will give you what the percentages are. I think I may be interested in this type of page. You probably aren't, but you know, this is the things that we want to drill down to when we're doing financial analysis and when we're meeting with Moody's in terms of bond rating. We want to be able to talk about what is our gross bonded debt per capita, what is it on a net basis, what's the relationship to income, and what's the relationship to our taxable base. So that's what's shown on 3-7. When we move to 3-8, we now start looking at, well, if we have the 6-year plan, it's going to cost us $19.8 million. Where is that coming from? Who's going to pay for that? So this is the chart that is really a representation of the numbers that are on page 3-8 and 3-9. And you can see where what we're looking at is municipal bonds would be worth about 28% of all of our spending. We would have future CIP, the pay-as-you-go portion, would be worth about 33%. We would have money that's already been put into the capital reserve funds of around 22%. We'd have about 12% that we haven't defined yet. That's money that we would be applying for grants on, or if we can't find those dollars, delay of projects. Again, as a planning document, we can leave the 12% unsecured in place because we're going to be looking to fund that, but we can change the schedule of when those events are going to occur. Moving on to the 3-9 on the leisure services, this will show you each of the major programs that would be accomplished over the 6-year period. And again, on Monday night, we'll put actual dollar amounts to each of those programs. So I'm not going to go through those at this point. Some of them really don't change on a year-to-year basis. We still show about a $450,000 amount that would be for open space acquisitions. Whether we do that or not is dependent on whether there's land that we're actually looking at. Neighborhood Guild, I've talked about that as far as the improvements. It may not be accomplished if we can't justify the funding availability. Beach programs, these are programs over the next 6 years as far as beach replenishment, dealing with the parking lot, dealing with the playground areas that need to be considered, and we'll go over those in some detail. 3-9 still looks at the general municipal programs. Is projects such as like the town hall improvements. These are to ensure that we get air conditioning into the council chambers sometime in the future. I won't say what year in the future, Joe, but sometime in the future. Actually, we do give you a year. I want to know if you know what year it is in the budget at this point. Communications department with various things, EMS, police, and we'll give you definitions on that on Monday. Moving on to we've got the school department and the water meters. I've talked about both of those, so I'm not going to spend any time Third-party revenues is the next area, because the main thing, when we look at the capital budget, it's not just property taxes that are going to pay for these projects. It's state aid reimbursements. It's Diane Drive, where we have a wastewater expansion, where we've still got the people that receive specific benefit, or sewers are now paying for the cost of what that sewer installation was. We've got real estate conveyance taxes, real estate conveyance taxes in the neighborhood guild of reinvested income, and fair share development fees. And I want to talk about those a little bit as we move forward. On 3-12, thanks. We take a look here at what's the rate per thousand necessary to service debt today in the 17-18 year, and what will it be in the 23-24 year? If we borrow that $5.5 million, it would, because there's a 30% reduction in the face value of debt, we'd be down to 19 cents. So overall, we'd be seeing, at the average household, would be seeing about a $15 reduction in debt that's associated, property tax payments that are associated with debt. Whether that comes true or not is dependent on several factors. One is continued growth in the tax roll and continued appreciation of property. When I talk about appreciation of property, I do want to put you on notice that with revaluation coming, we're looking right now, average sale prices to assessment values are probably in the area of 10% that we're looking at right now. That's a major change when you consider you've got a $4.1 billion roll. It would be looking at somewhere in the area of $400 million in new taxable properties if you were doing that revaluation as a full revaluation in the next year. We've just finished the full, so we're only going to be doing statisticals. But when we're looking at what pricing is selling for in the community, it's much higher than what it was when we finished that full reval a year and a half ago. So you're going to continue to see change in the community. If we see some type of recession coming forward, you'll see reductions in those values again. If we continue to see growth in the general state economy or national economy, there's a potential for that growth to continue. All that means is the tax rate comes down. It doesn't mean that you're able to generate more dollars other than new taxable property. So this goes back to that chart I talked to you about with each of the Southern Rhode Island communities. Everybody's got a different take on it. We could increase the roll by $400 million and reduce the rate to $10, but people would still be paying the same amount of property tax. Okay, and then we move on to 3-13. That starts us being able to show justification with Moody's in terms of what our relationships are as far as bonded debt to tax base. Moody's for AAA communities want to see a value of no greater than 0.63%. We're at half of that, and on a AA community like us, it would be at about a 0.98. So we're well under our targets if you wanted to use Moody's as a target, which I don't. I think you should be below those at all time. On page 3-14, there's really three factors that are listed there. The first one is the top 10 taxpayers. South Kingstown's top 10 taxpayers generate only 3.7% of your total taxes. When Moody's looks at it, they said a strong AAA community shouldn't have more than 7.4. So we're almost half of that. And that's good. Why is that good? It's good because you don't want all of your taxes coming from one source, because if there was an upset with that source, it could have serious impact on your roll. We saw this as a problem with APC had taxable properties for tangibles at almost, $90 million? And over a course of 5 years, that $90 million went down to about $10 million. That was when they changed from a manufacturing environment to an engineering environment. So this shows a very strong community where there's good diversification of the tax base, so that none of your top 10 taxpayers are really going to have profound impact on you. And when you look at the top 10 taxpayers, probably 4 to 5 of those are all South County Commons, as far as the major ones, that and National Grid. Second item that's on that page talks about market value per capita. Our market value is about $151,000. For Moody's purposes, they're looking at the strongest AAA communities would have value of about $227,000, and for AA's at about $109,000. So we're where we need to be. I'd like to see it higher than that on a market value per capita, but that number is growing as the revals continue. If the revals added 10% to the roll, that number of 151 would be up considerably higher. When we look at debt service, we're saying that about 3 cents of every dollar for gross payments on debt are coming out of the property tax. In many communities, their target is to stay under 10%. I think that's extremely high. I think you should probably be looking, I would never want to see it go above 7. And that would really be a doubling of where we are now. Bonded debt per capita, there was a study done in January 2016 that looked at the Rhode Island communities. When I looked at Narragansett, South Kingstown, North Kingstown, and Westerly, our bonded debt per capita was $465. Narragansett was $1,672. North Kingstown, $2,046. Westerly, $3,777. And Charleston was down at $696. You can see there's a major swing that's there and a major different impact, varying impacts as far as what the tax rates associated are. Debt per capita as a percentage of per capita income, there was that same 2016 study showed in 2014. It's odd that they're putting data together in 16 and they got to use the 14 year, but we're looking at the state as at about 5.86, and South Kingstown was in at 1.6. So again, very good as far as relationships to the state averages, or looking at the rating agencies' concerns. Debt service is a percentage of operating revenues. We're well below whatever mark you want to look at, and it will continue to decline even with the addition of that $5.5 million. 3-18 is an update from your capital budget. The audit has been completed and submitted to the state and accepted. What we're looking at is that we're looking at $10.7 million. I think it was $10.3 million was our estimate that was in the budget document. These are the real numbers. In the capital budget, I'll be making all of those revisions so that what's posted on the website will have these revisions, each of the pages that I gave you this evening. So we'll be at 10.7. One of the things I do want to talk about for a minute is, and you will be seeing it not with the next council meeting, but the following council meeting, is a liquidation of the Superfund reservation. Right now, undesignated fund balance has, or I should say, assigned fund balance has $1 million set aside for the Superfund improvements. The reason we did that, going back to, I think it was 1999, was that when we were settling with the federal government on Superfund, they wanted a demonstration that we had the ability to finance what we were signing off on. So the financial town meeting approved us signing off on reserving $1 million of fund balance for potential Superfund expenses. That was before we knew what we were going to do in the record of decision, where we decided on how we were going to pay for natural resource damages, how we were going to pay for our share of the cost of the remediation to the federal government, and how we were going to pay the state of Rhode Island for 30% of the maintenance costs associated with that landfill going forward for the next 30 years. So we had to show that $1 million. Since the time that we've issued the bonds for the Superfund improvements, we haven't needed any debt service to come from anything other than revenue generated out of the solid waste fund. As council's aware, we've got under lease the transfer station where there's a fee paid to the town both for rent as well as for the volume of materials that moves through that facility. The revenue that comes in is in excess of what our cost of operation is, and the monies that are in excess are then used to pay debt service. So there's no longer a necessity for us to keep that reservation of fund balance, that $1 million. So what Trish will be doing is preparing for consideration a liquidation of that reservation, which would mean that by the time we get to the close of the 2018 year, we'll be up to 11.8 million, and we'll be targeted about 14.5% of what the budget is for the 17-18 year. If you recall, our policy statement that is for undesignated fund balance is to be between 12 and 16.5%. This will get us closer to that target number. So there is no reason for that reservation to stay there. It should be liquidated, and then it will be on unassigned balance. If council wanted to use that for some other purpose, they certainly can. If it isn't used for, it will fall down to the bottom line, where we would be looking at going from 10.7 million up to 11.8 million dollars in unassigned balance. So that'll be coming to you. Rob will be reviewing that documentation. It should be available for you on the meeting on the 22nd. But that'll be the recommendation that'll come from staff on that item going forward. Last couple of pages on this section, we look at. I wanted to get on AA communities. There's 5 in the state, South Kingstown being one. I wanted to look at our relationship as far as our statistics compared to both Rhode Island communities as well as New England and United States. And you can see that that when it comes to our fund balance is in better shape than it is in Rhode Island. However, it is low in relation to both the medians in New England and with the United States. And I would say when we met with Moody's last, one of the concerns was that they wanted to see the fund balance higher, unassigned fund balance higher. One of their major concerns in Rhode Island is we are looked at as dependent on the state of Rhode Island from from an outsider looking in. So when they look at the concerns of $200 million potential deficits at the state level, they're concerned on what impact that would have on your ability to continue to pay debt service payments that they are providing certifications on. So what they're looking for is more money to be there so that they feel that there's a large enough cushion to be able to maintain those bond ratings. When you look at full value per capita, we're still down a bit from, and this goes back to 2016 data, compared to both Rhode Island and New England. Because property taxes is much higher in the New England region than in other parts of the country, I'm not too concerned with what the United States median is, or rather just looking at the New England I think is important. And then when you look at the direct debt, one of our selling points is our net direct debt per capita is much lower than either national, New England, or Rhode Island. And this is one of the things that we push when we talk with the rating agencies. Both Trish and I believe we should have had the AAA, but I think that that really being in the state of Rhode Island is part of the problem associated with seeing that change. I don't think it's going to happen for any of the 5 communities, whether it's Barrington, Middletown, Jamestown, or East Greenwich. I think all of us are going to see that we're at a point that market's not going to adjust upwards. I don't think it makes a lot of difference when we're selling for as low a value as what we're selling for at the 1.3 level. Even with a AAA, you're not going to get much better than that. So I don't think it's a problem, but I think once you have the AA1, you can't go to AA2 without somebody thinking there's concerns.
Now, Steve, you mentioned something interesting at that meeting with RIDE a few weeks ago, that because our bond rating is better than the state's bond rating, when the school wants to do a big project and bond for it, we don't always get the better rate because the state's bond rating is lower. Is that accurate?
Essentially, what my point that day was that if we are going to have South Kingstown bonding done through the state agency, and they're similarly bonding on that same issue for communities that have got single A ratings or A3 ratings, that we would not want to be blended with them because the blending would put our borrow cost up. Depending on what the General Assembly does on that $200 million, may provide us with a balancing. That was one of the things that RIDE was suggesting. In the past, we would want to bond and stand on our own rather than with communities that had a lower bond rating, just because it may push up our rate of interest. But again, that's something you're going to have to look at each and every time, and between Rob and Trish, they'll give you the recommendations on which way to go on that. Debt service schedules, similar to, just let me make the comment that, again, I've said the 3% interest 20 years or 10 years at 3% on transportation bonds. Looking at the schedules, the first schedule just shows you what the required debt is if we borrowed nothing else and we had to pay the debt service on that. The second schedule shows you the bonds that would be issued, when they would be issued, first in 2020. The bonds are issued in 2020, but you don't have debt service on it until 2021. So that's why you're seeing the debt service starting in the 2021 year. The last that shows you the debt service for all municipal debt. The bottom line that's important here is when we set up the debt service fund, what we wanted to do is to be able to provide property tax supports for school bonds and municipal bonds. And that doesn't include utility bonds, and it doesn't include guild bonds. But the debt service fund deals with school bonds and municipal bonds. And what we wanted to do is to smooth out what the annual contribution would be to the debt service fund, where even when we added debt, we would not see a spike in what the property tax requirements would be. And as you can see, the bottom line shows total property tax need. And what we're looking at is that we would try to hold constant at 1.1 million to 1,065,988. And again, you can see there's a declining balance that's there, so that we're not seeing any greater relativity to bond payment cost as a part of your property tax levy. Again, if you borrow additional dollars, those adjustments are going to have to be made. But the schedule is still set up with a declining property tax associated with the debt service. What that means is you have the flexibility to do additional loading without having major adverse impact on the percentage of dollars that are raised from taxes that are going to debt service. Conversely, if you don't borrow any more money, it frees those dollars up so that they can be used for operating programs or to minimize the amount of tax increases that are necessary on a year-to-year basis. Joe, I wanted to point that out.
Did you say increase or decrease?
Decreases. The last sections deal with fair share fees, and we're really getting out of the business of fair share development fees, and we should get out of that until we start seeing increased population placing demands on new capital improvements. On the education facilities, the council agreed to suspend collection of the education fair share fees as of July 1 of 17, where there was adequate funds available in that to pay debt service associated with the bonds that were still outstanding associated with Broad Rock School. When we look at the open space conservation bonds, I'm recommending that you consider, by July 1st of 2020, 2 years from now, consider also suspending that program. We've been using the fair share development fees for recreation principally to pay down debt associated with the purchase and development of the Green Hill Park. When I look at the debt schedule that's left on that program, I believe you will have collected by June 30th, 2020, the funds necessary to pay down and service the remainder of those bonds. So unless we need to build another park in the community based on population expansion, there should be no need for continued collection of those impact fees to new houses being constructed in the community. Also, I want to make it clear that fair share fees, the legislation associated with it at the state level, is making it more and more difficult to manage those programs. Where we have collected dollars in excess of 5 years in advance of needing that money, the state is now putting new conditions on if you collect it, it must be spent within a certain period of time. And I think that that rather than end up where somebody was challenging the legality of our collection system, we would be better off being able to manage it in a different manner. And that management option would be to close out that program once we deal with the remaining dollar amounts that are necessary to deal with that expanded park program, which was our last park. And you know, one thing I'll say is that I think we're very proud of the fact that we were able to build an entire park system in the community where we purchased the land and built the parks on those lands, and really now have a park in almost every area of the community for people to be able to enjoy. And the last one that we had to get completed was the Green Hill, and we will be paying off the final debt payment on that will be in the 2023 year. The fair share fee for recreation will be at the $3,276 rate. That's based on Gene putting the value of the of land up from $125,000 to $130,000. If you want to get to the formula, what's used here, and this is right in the ordinance itself, is you would take 10.5 and multiply it times 130,000, and then divide it by 1,000 people. And then you would multiply it by the number of people in a household, which is 2.4 people. And if you do that magic calculation, it comes out to $3,276. On units that are senior housing, the number of people per unit are estimated at 1.8 people per household. So it drives that cost down to $2,457. And that's what we would be charging in the 17-18 year. Last item that's important is that we also want to identify that we're not going to collect fair share fees on affordable housing units. The state also, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they would define how to come up with what an affordable housing unit could sell for in South Kingstown, and their number came out at $201,455. I'm not sure any new residential unit can be constructed for that type of a price to be exempted from the fair share fees. But what we have seen is several units that fair share fees would have been collected on that were in-law apartments or for children of special needs for additions that were put onto houses. So while it seems as if there's no reason to have this, there is a reason, because there are special circumstances where the ordinance would require the payment of the fee, but for having an exemption that was stated in the capital improvement program. So that's why we continue to show that in the budget document.
I have a question, Steve. Looking ahead and how we're going to approach affordable housing and how to make it more lucrative for builders to make affordable housing in a town like ours, is it possible to offer incentives for building houses that, say, cost under a certain amount but aren't necessarily affordable housing. Like, say we said anybody who can build a house for less than $300,000 will waive the fees for. You know what I mean? I'm trying to think.
I think that that's something that can be looked at. I mean, when the $100,000 was put forward in the current year, and it sits in fund balance at this point, available for use, we initially had the planning director, Chelsea, put together a request for proposals for affordable housing, and we got no submittals on that. We're looking at different opportunities in terms of dealing with the Affordable Housing Committee and what we can do, but I would say that I would really promote the use of that money should be going to get more units that have got a 30-year demand for affordability. Planning Board and Affordable Housing Committee are going to be meeting next week with Rhode Island Housing. We had talked about that with the group that we've been meeting with, the Housing Authority and hospital and schools. And so that's going to be the first meeting that the Planning Board and Affordable Housing will have, because they want to be able to get into a position of how do we best leverage those dollars. But at this point, we thought that possibly a $30,000 or $40,000 study to look at how do you amend the zoning ordinance to provide greater opportunity to, one, get the affordable housing inclusionary zoning out of residential areas that are away from transportation or within walking distance of services. How do you provide and promote reconstruction of existing areas of the community that could use it? Those are things that need to be considered, but we need to determine, are there federal programs or state programs where that $100,000 could be leveraged? There's also money that's still going to be available in the Open Space Reserve Fund that the council could continue to tap if there was a real reason to tap it.
Okay.
But what we need to do is to get some plan in place that targets how do we promote creating housing that is affordable and has a 30-year affordability requirement associated with it. How do we better manage the Section 8 certificates when, in fact, we're getting to a point where the rents are so high in the private market that people are not willing to accept what the rents would be under the Section 8 program. So we need to look at all of those different pieces at the same time rather than trying to shotgun at individual items. I think that that first step of having the money available should provide an opportunity for the Planning Board to, in conjunction with the Affordable Housing Committee, to come up with some ideas on what they think best. What's been the most frustrating for Affordable Housing Committee has been they've got no dollars. And, you know, they feel as if, you know, that they can't put ideas forward because there's nothing to back up those ideas. Now we're starting to give them the dollars. Now it's a case where they need to come up with the ideas that would provide you with the affordable housing opportunities. I think that, you know, inclusionary zoning, I've said it to you in the past, I don't agree with the way it works. I don't agree with putting affordable housing units in a subdivision out on Route 2 with no ability for people to get to services or bus line. It makes little sense. But until we change the ordinances and provide targeting for the developers, I think the developers will work with us as long as they know what specifically the community is trying to accomplish.
Thank you.
And that gets us to the next page, to be continued. That's all I have to offer tonight. I'll certainly deal with any questions that council or the public may have. I see a great public out there that I'm sure is chomping at the bits to ask questions.
As always, Steve, you leave very few questions left to be asked. It's very thorough.
Very, very thorough.
I'd like to point out that Steve mentioned my name twice.
Got to get all his
Numbers keep going down.
And both times it was regarding decreases. Thank you, Steve. Does anybody want to come up to have any comments or questions? Mr. Rose. No? I guess you certainly can. Absolutely.
It'll be for all of the lights that the town owns. Now, remember, on the state highways, those are owned by the State Department of Transportation. In fact, most of those lights on Route 1 and 108 have been transitioned already to LEDs. But anything that's in the local ownership, which would be on town roads, there are a few that are on state roads that we've placed where the state hadn't put those. So yes, it would be all of those. I think we're looking at about 1,400 lamps. At this point, we're looking to replace the existing system. We have been very frugal in adding new lights to the system because they are so expensive. Right now, we're spending over $110,000 a year just paying for the rental of those lights on an annual basis. We think we can buy the entire inventory for, at a depreciated price, it's probably going to be in the $75,000 range. And with the replacement of the LEDs, probably going to be in the area of $400,000, and the controllers another $200,000. But I think the buyback will be in the first 3 to 5 years. That's going to have to be justified before council's asked to take action on the acquisition. I want to see the real numbers as we go forward. As I said, the only other concern I have at this point is the contract that DUC has approved that the municipality would have to sign, because there's some make-work dollars there that could cost communities more money. League of Cities is working on that aspect of it, and I think that if that can be changed, we'll be in a better position.
Good.
Please be safe out there tomorrow. Stay off the roads if possible.
I'm walking down, Steve.
That's good.
Great. How are you? Good. What do you know?